First, let me thank our panelists for being here today. We really are fortunate to have Kathleen Ferris, who is, anyway, and was an architect of the Groundwater Management Act. If you had seen the film, you would know that Kathy, as a young, really almost pretty much fresh out of law school in Utah, moved to Arizona, joined the staff of the legislature, and landed the job of being the executive director of the Groundwater Management Study Commission. So as a freshly minted lawyer, she was responsible for herding the various interest groups, stakeholders. Some were legislators, some were called hired guns. And I think I will just take a moment to kind of tell the story, if that's okay. There was this commission that was appointed, and it was 24 members, 14 legislators, and then 10 individuals representing the specific interests. And those interests were utilities, mining, cities, and agriculture. And this commission, now just think about whether this sounds familiar, but they met in a big room, these 24 people, and they were supposed to negotiate some of the most difficult issues ever in the history of Arizona. And they weren't successful in that public format, those public meetings. There was a point where the group announced or conceded that it had reached an impasse. And it was at that point that then Governor Bruce Babbitt and Senator Stan Turley and I think then Speaker Burton Barr stepped in and began to hold a series of private meetings with a group that somehow acquired the title the Rump Group. And the Rump Group met for months. They worked out the hard deals and came up with a 177-page Groundwater Management Act. Governor Babbitt called a special session. About 4 days before the special session, the members of the legislature received the 177-page document that was going to transform the management of groundwater in the places where about 80% of Arizonans lived, including Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson, the block Tucson, on Grady's map. And on the day of the special session, they had a 7-hour session, passed the Groundwater Management Act, and it was promptly signed into law. So that's a very high-level, quick story, and maybe we can get into some more of the nitty-gritty as we go. So let me just start by asking Kathy, what do you see are the major differences between the negotiations on the Groundwater Management Act and today's negotiations on the DCP?
Well, if you would have seen the film, you would have seen the Rump Group photograph, and all of the members of the Rump Group could fit in one regular-sized conference room around one regular-sized conference table. In fact, it was the law offices of one of the members of the Rump Group. Today, when you look at the DCP steering committee, there were 41, I believe, members of that steering committee. They could never have fit into that size of a conference room, of course. And there were probably 200 members of the public watching the progress of the steering committee. So it was a much different time and place. We didn't need to have as many people at the table. And another very big difference is we didn't have any CAWCD. We didn't have any Central Arizona Project yet. And what did that mean? It meant that you did not have the entity that manages that project being part of the process, nor did you have competition for who would lead the state's water efforts. And I think while Sarah has talked about this, the extraordinary hands-on work of Governor Bruce Babbitt can never be diluted. He was magical. He has a degree in geology, aside from a law degree, and he took it upon himself as his personal issue to mediate the discussions and negotiations of this group. Every single meeting for 6 months. We logged at least 400 hours. He was there for every one of those. He was prepared for every one of those. He had an agenda of what he wanted to accomplish at each meeting. And in retrospect, everybody around that table agreed that without him, this would not have been accomplished. There has not been this kind of singular focus by an elected official of this capacity since that time.
Speaker Bowers, in thinking about the Groundwater Management Act, I was reflecting on some parallels that are kind of striking that you have with former Senate President Stan Turley. You're both Native Arizonans with families of Native Arizonans for generations back. You both have roots in the same part of Arizona, and you both represent the same part of town. In fact, you, like President Turley, have been kind of thrust into a leader position on water at a time when we're facing some really critical decisions about water. And thinking about those parallels and reading about Senator Turley, I came across a quote that really struck me. If you'll bear with me, it's not very long. He was asked about, he was asked that during the Groundwater Management Act, he was in a unique position, this person asked him, an interviewer, because you were representing a city, but yet you had your rural background. And he said, well, let me put it like this. I'm not very parochial in terms of representing. My priority goes like this. If it's a moral issue, if it's what I consider to be a moral issue, I'm going to do whatever I feel like for myself. I don't care what anybody else thinks or feels. I'm going to do what I want to do. Then I want to look at the state's interest. I think if you identify a state interest, that's where you should be. Then you go to a district interest, the district that you represent. And then you go to your party. The Republicans don't much like a guy putting the party down to number 4, but that's my priority. And my question for you is, today, is it possible for legislators to have priorities in this order, to put the state's interest ahead of a district and party? And if not, what does it mean for how the state will get through the big water challenges that we have ahead of us? Just a simple little question.
Andy, do you want to come up and answer?
No. I had one too.
How many of you are from Scottsdale? Do you know where the Ace Hardware is on used to be Scottsdale Road, almost close to Osborne on the west side of the road? When you walk in that store, on the north wall is a black and white faded photograph of Scottsdale when I lived on the corner of Granite Reef Road and Indian School in 1956, 57. Went to Tonaway School when it was in a different location up here. My family, like Stan's family, has been here since around 1875, so members of the various tribal communities have us by 1,000 or so years, but it has some history. I had a grandfather, as I mentioned earlier. My husband and my grandmother was on the Salt River Project board in the 20s and 30s. So we've had this thing watching Scottsdale grow, then moving to Mesa. Also, when I was born in Mesa, I think there was 4,000 people in Mesa. And that may date me somewhat. I knew Stan Turley very well. I remember him as an ecclesiastical leader. He had been blinded in one eye in an accident of his earlier years. Was the Holden, which as you go past Heber on your way to the road either to Pinedale and then in Showlope goes past a place called Airpine. And that was their ranch, the Sundown Ranch, where he grew up as a child. My daughter married the present owner. And so it's back in the family. I'm now part of his family. So there are little circles that I have noted many times. Grew up on a sheep ranch in Chino Valley north of Prescott, which I remember in the explosion picture that Grady had up here, where a lot of water right legal activity is occurring along the Verde and in the Big Chino, at those aquifers, etc. I grew up over Del Rio Springs playing with, and you're thinking, what does this got to do with anything? In fact, it has a lot to do with something. And which was the first territorial capital of Arizona, not Prescott. So it was in the Big Spring. It's over by Puro on the north end of Chino Valley. And a Bowers was the first territorial patent holder in this territory. So there is a history. The subject of water is maybe for somebody who grew up in my particular household with Stan, in his particular household, where a well, in the days of Chino's corn days, prior, you live out north by Paulden, that was just up the road from Del Rio Springs, 2 miles. In those days, it was an idyllic place, Chino Valley. Cornfields, which was exported all over the western United States. And then the water became more important than the corn, and Prescott, as they bought up the water rights, it turned into Oklahoma after the Dust Bowl. It just evaporated. The fields have all gone back to trying to reestablish native vegetation. And I think about that as a rural, split in my middle. On the rural side, do I want, as Kevin Moran said, do I want all the rest of Arizona to look like what happened then? Or is there some balance that we have to have? Do I want the Colorado River to look like the Salt River does from the Granite Reef Dam and a little bit of residual out from there, but basically sand, until it starts picking up the rest of the effluent that we all we put back into the aquifer, or in the case of all you who are spending millions of dollars to pump water into the aquifer thinking it's going to stay there. I'm telling you, it doesn't. It moves. And so we've got to keep pumping it in on the high end in order to have it throughout the valley. If that was a place that were something that we would demand. And I just realized that was a question and not an invitation to a soliloquy about the history of Arizona that Sarah gave us. But a point is that the rural part of me remembers, the urban part of me respects, and that there has to be this balance between the two. And there are people like me who see that.
Thank you. Kathy, and by the way, folks, we think that we have a solution to make the film run. So my proposal is that we have our panel ask a few more questions and then give it a go. And Dave will signal you when it's time to give it a go. And if not, we'll keep you around so that we can ask a few more questions. We have some questions coming in from people here in attendance, and we'll have a chance to get to those. So Kathy, let me turn to the Groundwater Management Act. As you alluded to, there wasn't a CAP at the time, but the CAP was a big part of why Arizona mustered up the will to pass the Groundwater Management Act. Can you talk about how that went down briefly, and I think you would agree that the Department of the Interior was sort of wielding a big stick back then, and can it wield a big stick now in the time of DCP and Colorado River negotiations? One question.
So I'm going to make my answer as short as I can, so hopefully you can watch the film. You will see in the film how the Department of the Interior threatened Arizona with not funding the CAP unless we had a Groundwater Management Act. And yes, they were a big stick, and it was very important. They can be a big stick again. They control the Colorado River. But I also wanted to say, it's really important to understand there are so many other people that have to be recognized for their efforts, and that these things don't get accomplished without a lot of heroes. When you watch the film, you will see these heroes in action. And I want to say there is a similarity to DCP because there are heroes today emerging in that discussion. One of them who has not yet been mentioned today is Governor Stephen Roe Lewis of the Gila River Indian community. And despite the challenges to their efforts and to their integrity, the Governor Lewis led the community to approve the use of their water to help mitigate the impacts of DCP. He has been a major influence on the success of this project behind the scenes, and he deserves credit for his leadership. And I would also call out State Senator Lisa Otondo, who sits on the steering committee and has been brave in her calls to the group to not lose sight of what they're trying to accomplish, which is to keep more water in Lake Mead and to compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. It's what we have to do to move things forward. Thank you.
Speaker Bowers, did you want to comment or follow up, or do you want me to just ask you?
No.
Okay. Just want to give you guys a chance. Mr. Speaker, you did something pretty brave over the last year. You and Senator Griffin took your committees, the water oversight committees of the Senate and the House, around the state for a series of listening sessions. And you spent quite a bit of time on the road with your committees in those sessions. And I know you heard concerns about groundwater in different parts of the state. Can you share what your takeaways were from those listening sessions with respect to groundwater?
Thank you. We went to Gila Bend, Casa Grande, went to Tucson, Yuma, Morenci, Safford, Thatcher, Kingman, Buckeye, obviously in Scottsdale. We went to Verde Valley. I'm probably even forgetting some. Much as you might imagine, different parts of the state have different views of water, especially groundwater. But as Kevin said, almost uniformly around the state, the water levels are dropping in rural Arizona, with the exception, and I don't know how extensive around Tucson, but Tucson has, in large measure, garnered support and probably with the help of the city government, etc., the county, and are very close, if not in safe yield, and which is a major accomplishment and for which I congratulate. But, for example, Verde Valley, there are some outstanding legal concerns, but there's 77,000 ground wells in that county area, which have some impact on the earth. And so there's a large contingent pushing a view of the Verde, much like what Kevin has explained, that there be water in the Verde River. In ground well pumping by larger corporate enterprises is a concern in the Kingman area. In Yuma, the maintenance of an extremely complex, what is described by Representative Dunn as the Intel of agriculture, the finely tuned water and agriculture interface that they have there. They don't want that messed with. They will fight to preserve it, et cetera, et cetera. And so around the state, each area had a nuance, but one uniform thing was they all look at it as their water. Our water in this area, we don't want going anywhere else. And I think of Chino Valley, and I understand that.
Does that give you ideas about solutions for those places, or how the state or the legislature, the Department of Water Resources can help those localities arrive at solutions for the concerns that they're currently expressing?
The The challenge of exempt wells, where you can, and I'm an owner of 2 of them, at my home and at our residence up in the Canal Mountains, is that they are by law kept under 35 gallons a minute. Doesn't sound like a lot. Multiply that times 77,000, and it can have an effect, I would guess, in a micro-region impact. But the larger commercial wells are being currently monitored, and they're, or if they're not monitored by a meter, they can be monitored by the voltage and the amperage used in the equipment. And just by the bill, you can translate that into gallons. And that is a large part of the diminishing groundwater fears in Arizona. So that might be an area that we have to look at. As far as the legislative review, that's something that I think at least deserves explanation. There's nothing like fear. Our well, when it went out, that's fear. I have a daughter that requires for her life's maintenance to have a certain supply of water. And so that is touchy. And so I understand that as we go into those types of examinations of metering and water usage statewide, I think that's in our future. We need to look at it. I'm not saying it has to come, but we need to understand it so we're not afraid of what we find out.
Thank you. Kathy, any comments on the question of how can we help rural areas that are not within groundwater regulation? How can they address the issues of concern?
Well, I'm really happy to hear Speaker-elect Bowers talk about we do need to look at gathering data from these wells. We cannot, somehow I think my mic's on, maybe not. We cannot manage what we don't know. And so it's critical for us to collect data and to know what we're dealing with. It's also really important, I think, for people to understand that groundwater in Arizona is a public resource. And while a lot of folks still like to believe that they own the water under their ground, they do not. It is owned by the state of Arizona for the benefit of the public good. And the state is free to regulate the uses of groundwater to protect the state's interests and in the interest of public health and safety. So we should never lose sight of that fact, and we should also remember that a lot of those areas where we have problems now are areas that did not want the Groundwater Management Act to apply to them. And if they had done something way back then, we probably wouldn't have the same kinds of problems we see now.
Okay, I've had the good news from Dave Brown that the video is ready and they think it'll work. I would ask our panelists to stick around, stay close. And I want to just give the speaker the last word here, just very briefly. You're in a room full of people who have decided to take this morning to learn about water, its value leadership in the O'Connor Institute. Any words for these people who want to help find solutions to our water challenges?
I thank you. As we have gone on, water brings out crowds, especially in Arizona. And there are multifaceted solutions yet to be discovered. But there is a fact that a biome has a carrying capacity. We artificially extend and expand our carrying capacity in this area by technology, by centrifugal pumping back then, and can in the future with desal and other opportunities. We need to look at those, and it will take support and consensus. The idea of compromise is great, but even between Kathy and I, you should see two things. One is works for a very large city, and they look at water differently than the guy who depends on it for the shower. And that's his little well. So we look at it differently. But we understand its critical nature. We understand that we have to have it. For the urbanized population, you losing water is as bad as me losing it. And so that's a commonality that we all share, and I thank you and congratulate you for your interest.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your flexibility